I'm Dale Smith for Looney Politics, and in the wake of Hurricane Fiona battering the East Coast, there are questions about what the federal government's role is in terms of disaster relief. Now, this is largely a provincial responsibility, and the province will be carrying the lion's share of the load here, but the federal government will be able to respond in a couple of different ways. The first way is through the deployment of the Canadian Armed Forces. Now, the province can request the Army at any particular point, and the federal government will release whatever troops the province asks for. There's a mechanism in place for that, and it's fairly seamless and automatic. The only thing we need to remember is that we have a decreasing capacity around being able to provide this kind of relief, both because we have an increasing number of troops for NATO operations in Latvia and to train Ukrainian troops over in the United Kingdom, but also because there's a retention and recruitment crisis within the armed forces, and the ability to respond to an increasing number of natural disasters in Canada is getting smaller and smaller. And that's something we need to keep in mind in terms of a federal ability to respond to these kinds of events in the future. The other way in which the federal government helps is, of course, money. And there is a particular set formula by which the federal government is able to provide relief funds to a province in the aftermath of such a disaster. Now, how this tends to work is there is a set formula for per capita funds for the scope of the disaster, which will apply to certain kinds of spending. And the check will go directly to the province and not to individuals. So again, the provincial role is much larger here. And essentially what happens is the bigger this disaster, the larger the federal government's portion of this reimbursement is, because the federal government does have greater fiscal capacity than most provinces, and therefore it's able to provide more assistance when it's required. But we also need to remember that this always comes at the back end. So what happens is it's the provinces who basically submit receipts to the federal government, who will then reimburse the province. And that's why federal funds for disasters tend to follow along far later than the disaster itself. The federal government is also matching funds or donations for the Canadian Red Cross, which is also within its capacity to do. There are often complaints that there would be other local charities or groups who may be better suited, but I think what's happening there is that the federal government has an established relationship with the Canadian Red Cross and has some accountability measures in there where they may not have that same relationship with a lot of smaller local organizations. As the East Coast recovers from this hurricane, the federal government has indicated that they will be there, and these are the mechanisms by which that will be happening. For Looney Politics, I'm Dale Smith.